Hello, everyone. Hello, Ignite. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about building the plane whilst learning to fly. And that might sound like a weird title. When I was asked to come up with a title to talk about the challenges of enterprise adoption of IT technology, I thought back to all of the conversations I'd had about technology since I started working with the cloud in around 2014. And whilst 2014 might sound like a long time ago, when we think about the institutions that we build our enterprises upon, it really isn't that long. 2014 was a time when Microsoft had only just started nailing the compute, storage, and networking space alongside some of the data fundamentals to build the modern cloud platform that we see today. In fact, if we look at the Gartner hype cycle of the time, we'll notice that certain things on here took, they were still in their peak of inflated expectations or innovation triggers when we think about the cloud platform that we have today. It wasn't until 2017 that Gartner even defined serverless PaaS that we can see down there. But it was really from 2016 onwards where things started to change. Containers were already a thing. Kubernetes almost became a thing overnight. And Microsoft realized this and doubled down on it. And I think about all the conversations that I had around all of these specific technologies with customers and enterprises and developers, and I think I've spoken a lot of tech in that 6 years from 2016 onwards about the great platform that Microsoft has built. So why am I giving you a history lesson? Because there's one problem with all of this tech, and it's because it's been available for 6 years. But at the scale that Bytes operates at and the customers that we operate with, we've only just started having conversations around how we build a strategy around it, how enterprises adopt them and start using them properly, how the whole business starts getting on board with certain technologies. All of this has been built in 6 years. 6 years we've been expected to learn this at pace and keep in step with the rate of change of Microsoft, and that's not really a very long time. So why am I giving you this history lesson again? Well, if we think about it, was it that the technology was bad? Is that the reason that it's only just started to be adopted by the enterprise? No, obviously the technology is bad. Is it that the IT team isn't quite doing what they should be doing as an IT team to adopt it into the enterprises? No, it's not that either. Sorry for a lot of you, but we can't even blame the developers this time. Fundamentally, though, it's impossible to adopt something at enterprise scale without operating across the whole organization. So it's not just IT teams having a play with something. It's not just developers using a new service to fix one specific problem. You need your purchasing teams, your accounting teams, your HR teams to be fully on board with your cloud strategy for things like Kubernetes to start being part of your adoption. And so when I was thinking about a title for this slide, I thought, I can't tell you what Microsoft are going to bring out over the next 6 years. There's much better people in this whole conference to tell you all of that stuff. But what I can tell you is that adoption of some of this new technology is not always plain sailing. There's some really good ways of doing it. There's some horrific ways of doing it that we speak to about all the time. But the reason why it's taken so long is because everybody's trying to rebuild the plane whilst learning how to fly. That's what we're here to talk about today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Simon Dobbs from Bytes and James Complin from Microsoft. So, first question, Simon, really is to you. Why don't you give us an introduction as to who you are, what your journey through the technology landscape has been?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I head up the technical pre-sales and architecture team at Bytes, and we work across our core pillars, namely cloud, infrastructure, cybersecurity, and modern workplace. And the whole reason that the team exists is to work with our customers, understand their objectives, and then design solutions, technologies, and services to help them meet their objectives. Prior to working at Bytes, I used to work for a hosting provider as an infrastructure manager. And I think the most interesting thing about the fact that I used to work as an infrastructure manager for a hosting provider is I'm very glad that I'm no longer an infrastructure manager for a hosting provider. This will shock you, but it turns out Microsoft know more about the data center business than I do.
Thanks for that. We speak to customers day in, day out at varying scales. Obviously, a lot of this is focused around how enterprise is adopting IT. You must speak to customers that are nailing it and doing it really well. Can you tell us a bit about how they've managed to build a strategy around some of the modern cloud technology available to them?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've been at Bytes for 6.5 years, and we've got customers who are, you know, pretty early adopters into Azure and kind of went early. So if you look back 6-7 years ago, you know, a particular insurance company we work with, I'm thinking of, you know, they went in big. They committed to moving to the cloud, moving into Azure, and they went along something that looks a lot like the Gartner hype curve, funnily enough. Huge expectations from the business. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to drive revenue. We're going to get things done. It's going to be super quick. We're probably even going to save some money. And then they start to adopt and deploy, and all of a sudden, wait, it's costing lots. Have we just moved all of our problems into someone else's data center? So then we started working with them and said, well, let's look at the architecture, unpick things a little bit. Let's get into the weeds of kind of what you've put in there. Let's optimize again, and optimize some more. And then we kind of moved into that point of acceptance and understanding of how to adopt. And then kind of they're like, right, let's go. We can do this. We can get through this. And now we can kind of deploy infrastructure as code, PaaS, SaaS, containers, barely any IaaS in sight. And they're really kind of embracing and kind of doing what they need to do now.
Yeah, it sounds like it took time for that customer. James, over to you. You work at Microsoft, but you've also worked on the customer side, the partner side, the SI side. Why don't you tell us some of the stories about cloud adoption that you've seen from there?
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, picking up on some of the comments you made around enterprises and how they struggle sometimes adopting the platform, and something we see particularly in some of the areas that I look after in media comms and professional services, you know, but obviously insights across industry, is the differentiation of what the strategy is for the customer moving forward, and actually picking that particular initial workload and building that MVP. So if we go back to the analysis of, or the analogy of building the plane while we're flying, is really trying to look at opportunities where we can innovate and develop quickly versus building the utopia of what we think we might need, versus having that more agile approach of looking at what we need now, moving quickly and then iterating once we've picked that workload and actually started operating that workload in the platform.
Do you think I've been unfair tarring all of enterprise with the same brush there? Do you think that maybe I've only seen a few use cases and actually some people are getting adoption done really well and a lot quicker than that 6-year cycle that I showed there?
So from experience, I'd say I would sit on the fence a little bit in true fashion, but I think there are outliers from an enterprise perspective that have moved their legacy workloads, I would say, into the native platform as it is, and actually don't have anything on premises anymore. If you look at some of our largest retail customers, I mean, there are case studies out there that you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking around, but they've moved all their workloads into Azure, really embraced that infrastructure as code, and James was touching on it in his previous session that we've just switched over from, around that infrastructure as code, cattle, not pets kind of approach to the platform, and really are pushing the platform and really innovating and pushing us as an organization to make our features and our services a lot better.
Perfect.
Yeah. It's all about organizational context at the end of the day and making the right decisions.
Yeah, I think so, and that certainly reflects what I've seen. But one of the challenges, which I raised just a minute ago, is actually the cloud skills gap, and it's something that we're speaking about day in, day out with our customers. A lot of people are really struggling with hiring. We've seen loads of sessions at Ignite talking about it. And the challenge is being able to find the right blend of people at the right time in the relevant technologies in a landscape that's always changing, right? How do you know that the hires that you're making today are going to be suitable for your core infrastructure or development teams for tomorrow? How do you even know that the skill set that they've got is relevant and useful when you yourself haven't been able to stay in step with the rate of change of Microsoft's releases? We've got people at Bytes who it's their full-time job to stay in step with Microsoft releases, to work with the Microsoft solutions architects, to figure out new products that are coming out, and work with our largest enterprise and largest customers to say, hey, that's a really good idea. Maybe we should take that to some of these customers because I was chatting with them last week and it fixes that problem. That's these people's full-time job. That's all they do, is stay in step with the rate of change. Now, I personally am not fortunate enough to be one of these people. I'm hoping to attend a few or as many technical sessions as possible over the next few days. But I know that after Ignite, I'm going back with some fresh ideas, but I'm also going back to a full inbox and a load of BAU work to do, and a lot of you will probably be facing that problem as well. Conversely, some people here will be starting out in IT, and they'll be going, look at all this great stuff. I want to go and use this stuff, but they don't have an opportunity to go and use that stuff at scale. And the one question that IT resources, HR, business partners, IT managers are asking is, how can they build a team that leverages outside insight, from third parties, from Microsoft, from vendors? How can they get new ideas and fresh ideas whilst also keeping the lights on? So, I was speaking to a friend of mine very recently, and I'm going to go back to the plane analogy because he's a pilot. He flies drunk people from Newcastle in and out of Ibiza week in, week out, and he got bored of this, understandably, and he wanted to learn a new plane that's just been built. And I said, look, when you want to learn how to fly a new plane, what do you actually do? Right? How do you learn to fly a new plane? It's new. No one's really ever flown it before. And he said, well, what we do is we do months of classroom training and theoretical training. We study manuals, and we do what's called a type rating. So a type rating, for those of you that don't know, is exams in the plane. You sort out what every switch and what every knob and what every radar does, and I don't know enough about planes to be able to go any deeper than that. But you do a lot of theory around the plane, and then you sit some exams on it, similar to the way that we'd do some documentation learning and some MS Learn stuff, and then we'd sit some exams around that. But the problem with that is we then don't get the opportunity to fly it. They get to sit down in a simulator with the people that built the plane. They get to sit down with a safety pilot and an instructor pilot in a simulator, and they practice normal operations. They also practice abnormal operations. So normal operations being takeoff, landing, maybe a bit of turbulence, how to refuel the plane, that kind of stuff. Abnormal operations being loss of pressure, bird strikes, engine out scenario, P1s, as we call them in IT. They get to practice them with the person who's built the plane, built the product, side by side. And then they go out and fly it in the real world. Not with passengers. No, again, that's still a bit too much risk. They fly it again with their safety pilot and their instructor pilot to be able to, simulate, well, not simulate, they're in the plane, but be able to navigate some of the challenges that they're going to face whilst flying the plane. And these people provide a safety net for the pilot. They've built the plane. So any questions that the pilot have, they know it intricately. They've done it before. They've flown the plane, they've built the plane, and they're there to really guide them on how to do that. Let's transpose that to IT, and it might help articulate some of the challenges that we have. A new bit of technology comes out, Microsoft make a release, there's a new bit of open source that everyone's using, and all of a sudden, everyone's supposed to have years of experience using it, developing enterprise-level solutions for people. There's supposed to be a really healthy pool of candidates to hire from. Why aren't there people who know how to auto-scale certain Kubernetes clusters and host pools on demand for me? Why aren't there people who have FinOps insight into HPA and VPA? Why aren't these people available for me to just go and hire? Right? And it causes a struggle for the business because you want to use the latest and greatest, but there's just not a healthy candidate pool of people ready to come and work for you. But the truth is that those with the experience operating enterprise-scale IT environments are rarely ever keeping in step with developing things and building new things with these tools. Those learning how to build the newest and shiniest things with the newest tools, those making releases and committing to different projects, normally are lacking the enterprise flight hours required to operate it for the biggest and largest of companies. And I know I'm conflating the two analogies here, but really, how different is auto-scaling a 747 to landing a server? So it's really important to focus on a way of upskilling your team to keep them relevant and balancing that with your strategy, because freeing up your team's time is difficult and finding people is tough. And if you're sat there thinking, do you know what, Chris, this is all irrelevant to me because I work for a massive company and I'm operating enterprise IT systems, and also I am committing stuff to GitHub every week and I'm an active member of the developer community, then please feel free to go and give your details to Bytes and our recruiter will be in touch within a couple of weeks. So how can we approach it? There's some really good ways of doing it. Let's go back to James and Simon where we can have a talk about it. So, James, first question is for you. you're building the plane, right? Microsoft are building the plane here, and it's kind of hard to integrate that when things are going from inception at Microsoft to actually being delivered at enterprise level. Talk me through the process of how things get from Microsoft having an idea to add something into Azure to you guys actually delivering it.
Yeah, really good question. So I think, and kudos to all those that do keep up with all the latest features and service releases. I know that my team are heavily on that, and it's a full-time job having been on the other side of the fence as well. So, but from a release perspective, we are really, really driven by customer demand, I would say. So I would go back to the initial conversation of customers pushing the platform, asking for new features, asking for new releases, is where we really start honing and collecting that user story, and then taking it to, is it going to be impactful across multiple industries? Is it going to be impactful across multiple territories, for example? That's then built out. We then take it into a canary region for testing, test it against all of our other services, because remember, we're a hyperscale, so we've got to test it against every single other service that is essentially going to impact on. Then we're moving to a private preview. The customers that generally get nominated for that are the ones that have been partaking in raising the profile or the request for that service, and they generally work directly with our product engineering groups. So again, refining and rebuilding and tweaking that service to make sure it's fit for purpose for our customers going forward. Next iteration is then private preview, and I'm sure everyone's jumped on the private preview bandwagon or public preview bandwagon as well. Mm-hmm. Getting all of those services early, understanding them, deploying them in test or UAT environments, and then from there we can then move into GA depending on passing the relevant gates for acceptance. Perfect.
So another question that I've got for you speaks more to the skills gap question, and that is, you're a member of the Northern Azure user group. User groups are a fundamental part of cloud adoption because they give people the opportunity to speak in a forum about new technologies. Do you ever have it where someone might work for an enterprise and they come to the Azure user groups and they learn about a technology, and then they take that back to their enterprise with this new great idea about how they're going to solve everything, and then they just end up screaming into the void of a massive enterprise because they're just one person that learned about something?
Yeah, again, it comes back to that strategic conversation. So you will always see it quite a lot, especially from a skills gap perspective, and it's global, right? The skills gap issues that we're facing in the industry. But we as Microsoft do a lot around that to try and help on that, from enterprise skills initiatives, global open hacks, and also then the boot camps or the Northern Azure user group or multiple user groups across the UK. So that's a really, I would say, people turn up there that's passionate around technology, passionate around the platform, and try and learn something new. Taking it back into the enterprise is a slightly different conversation, I would say, in a sense of it might work if the strategic vision is aligned or akin to that particular service or solution. But again, it's trying to drive the business outcomes versus the technical outcomes that we need to kind of focus on. So having that synergy with strategic vision of the organization into what that person's particularly learning at that time, and is it the right thing for the business and driving the right impact? Yeah, perfect. Simon, you obviously lead a technical team at Bytes. The technical team spans not just Azure, but cybersecurity, modern workplace, things like that. So that's quite technical people in a range of solutions. How do you really enable them to keep their skills fresh and sharp to go and talk to the customers in this sort of landscape?
I think it's, as ever, kind of with the releases that Microsoft do, that's learning from user stories. It always boils down to people and understanding people. So whilst I may not be a subject matter expert in a particular area, it's about understanding that person, understanding about how they want to relate what they understand to customers, and then unlocking that, understanding it, and giving them the tools, whatever that may be, to go out there and talk to customers. So I just try and provide the platform, the view of our overall strategy, arm them with those two things, and then give them the space to go out there and succeed. But then also honesty, providing honesty. I think perhaps sometimes we've lost a bit of honesty when we're sort of interacting with each other, and that's not about a blame game or a blame culture. It's about giving people the honest feedback to enable them to grow and improve. And I think that's a really important fundamental piece.
So if you've got people who are attending user groups and are attending developer communities, and they're taking that back to the organization, what you're saying is they need a safety net to do it. They need to feel safe that they can go and deploy things, and they're not going to say, "Oh, you wasted your time doing that."
Yeah,
direction.
You've got to listen to them, even if you maybe go, really interesting. But the next time, the next idea might be the one, and it might be something that really fundamentally changes how you do things and moves things forwards. So all ideas are good ideas until you kind of prove otherwise.
Yeah, perfect. Well, the last point on this talk was about some of the financial management lessons learned from operating or having insight into quite a lot of Azure spend. So going back to the point I raised at the beginning, IT as a business unit hasn't really been doing cloud that long, 6 to 8 years for Azure for most people. What goes alongside that is obviously purchasing models, accounting, those whole finance and HR business partners that you're going to be working with. They're still just starting to get the cloud, and one of those is that finance and accounting team, and that's where the culture of FinOps has come from. Bytes have the privilege of supplying Azure to over 1,500 customers, not just in the UK, but worldwide. We've got visibility over $300 million of Azure spend every year. We sort out the enterprise agreements for over 300 customers, and a large amount of our business comes from direct and indirect CSP. It's because of this that Bytes onboarded more customers into Azure in the UK than any other partner last year. That's not the important thing. Well, it is, but the important thing, really, is that no other customer understands how enterprises purchase cloud like Bytes. Bytes have a whole business unit set up, designed to not just look at cloud spend, but look at IT spend as a whole and figure out how can you maximize that spend? How can you do more with less? That's been the theme of Ignite so far. Where can savings be made? Are things optimized? Are there technical optimization areas to be made? Are there commercial optimization areas to be made? Are there overlaps in your licensing? And that's what we do with these business partners day in, day out. This is a screenshot from something called Quantum. Quantum is an in-house built tool by Bytes. We use Microsoft data, and we use Microsoft billing and cost management. That pulls into it. But a load of other data sources pull into it as well. MLS statements, licensing agreements, software assurance, hybrid benefit, all of those things pull into it, but we also pull in a lot of external to Microsoft things around their IT asset estate. The reason why we do this is because Quantum is an in-house built tool. We can create any dashboard from Quantum that we want. IT don't need Steve from accounts calling them up, asking them to explain the difference between DTUs and vCores and why the reservations on vCores won't work in DTUs. And to be honest, if you work in IT, you probably really don't want to explain to Steve from accounts what the difference between a DTU and a vCore is. We're only just managing to grasp explaining it to Steve at Bytes. Conversely, if you're in the IT operations and platform team, you don't need to see everything. You just need to see what you're accountable for. You need to see all of your premium SSDs that you've spun up when standard SSDs would have done. You need to see all of your block stores that you've set up that aren't attached to VMs that are just wasting spend. So what Quantum for Azure can do is it can do both. It can look at both of those things, create dashboards for the people that need to see the dashboards, and filter out all of the noise that you don't need to see. The reason why that's important, and some of you will notice this familiar triangle, the reason why that's important is because FinOps isn't just a thing that you turn on. It's not just a thing that you do. If we remember DevOps around 6 years ago, everyone was thinking, was DevOps a culture? Is DevOps a tool? Is it a process? And really, it was none of that. What DevOps is it's getting the right people at scale to care. It's getting the operations team to care about the woes of the development team to care about the woes of operating the stuff that they're developing. And once that all happens, great, you've got DevOps. And there are tools and processes and people and technology that sit underneath that. But fundamentally, the outcome of DevOps is getting all the people to care about this. And it's the same with FinOps now. That term's being bandied about, and people are saying, how can we do FinOps? How can we implement FinOps? Well, if we look at this and work it backwards, getting people to care is the end goal. What you need to do is get people to be enabled on the things that they can change, but to do that, you need to give people the visibility. Day in, day out, we're getting off calls with IT managers and finance partners, and they're saying, look, we don't understand our cloud spend. We don't understand how to share costs of Kubernetes. We don't understand how to share costs of any shared services. We've gone past the point of just being able to assign to cost tag or cost center or business unit through enterprise landing zones and tagging policies. But now we've got converged infrastructure that is all muddled together on these hyperscale platforms, and we're really struggling to accurately relay to our business partners what costs are what. Software providers don't know how to charge their customers. These kind of conversations we're having day in, day out. And unless you can provide visibility on that, you can't enable people to go and change these things. And once you enable them, you can get them to care. So, James, back over to you. You're going to talk a little bit about some of the features coming out in Microsoft soon to help it that you've been part of.
Yeah, thank you. So I think anyone that knows me well, I'm super passionate around cost optimization and showing that we kind of get the most out of the platform for the best price. Again, to coin that, doing more with less is kind of the key of what we're trying to push this year. So some of the stuff we've worked on previously and is, I would say, in private preview, currently deployed in 6 customers at the moment is, and it will be linked into the CAF documentation on the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure documentation site, is a kind of package deployment to help all the customers get their insights across their whole estate, leveraging all the commercial levers that we have within the platform, such as reserved instances, and then also the technical elements there as well. Right sizing is kind of key to being successful in cloud, not getting that, I would say, costs spiraling out of control, the bill shock we talk about here quite a lot internally. So that's coming out probably within the next 6 months, so definitely watch out for that. And if anyone wants any more details, then give me a shout after this.
Brilliant. Simon, you see it day in, day out, and you speak to our customers about it, why it's really important to nail the commercial element of your IT strategy.
Yeah, for sure. IT budget is finite, so you've got to squeeze every drop out of it. And it's funny that you call it bill shock. We have a guy at our place that calls it cloud shock. And going back to that kind of insurance customer I was talking about, when they first got into cloud, there was like a... but when you do it the right way and you optimize, you can get the most out of it. And it's also that technical optimization piece is kind of what's coming next, isn't it? And what people are really starting to focus on, and what we're really starting to focus on, baking things into the architecture, baking the economics into the architecture.
Well, I think the biggest risk is when IT budgets start getting constrained because people aren't being good custodians of the budget. They're seeing their teams not thinking with a FinOps brain. They're not thinking, there's no CCOE process for financial management, so IT in general gets its budget purse strings tightened a little bit, and that's when innovation is going to slow down. And at a time like this, that's really what we don't want, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think you mentioned it, you touched on FinOps as a process, and you mentioned CCOE there. It's also a cultural change of people being like custodians responsible of what they're deploying, how they're architecting it, how they're optimizing it from an application level, if you're that segregated within the deployments as well. So having that view of the world and being responsible for what you're deploying in the platform is kind of key.
Perfect. And I think, if there's one takeaway from all these sessions, it's to put that financial accountability hat on and, get the visibility that you need to start making people care about your cloud environments. So that's it from me. If you've heard anything here today that makes you think, hey, maybe I should be talking to Bytes about how we can make this work for us, we've got a range of services that address the IT skills gap, cloud financial management and enterprise adoption of cloud. If you haven't heard of us, we focus on modern workplace, hybrid infrastructure, and cybersecurity. But what we're really keen on is the supply and optimization wrap of all of that. A technology is as good as the technology that it is, right? But if everyone just goes out and purchases technology, like I said, purse strings will be tightened and innovation will be stifled. It's really important that we purchase the right technology at the right time for the right use case, and we purchase that from someone who really knows how to supply it to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank James Complin from Microsoft and Simon Dobbs from Bytes. I hope you enjoy the rest of Ignite. I've been Chris Colledge. Have a good afternoon, everyone.